Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi, I'm Beaumont and welcome to Secrets Exposed. This is the show that takes you up close and personal with world-leading business experts. And our topic for this interview is how to start and scale a technology company. That coming up in just a moment. My special guest today is successful entrepreneur Jamie Pride, and our topic for the interview is how to start and scale a technology company. Jamie, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so tell us a bit about your entrepreneurial journey. Maybe let's start with the company that you have right now and a bit about where it's kind of positioned, and then we'll talk a bit about your entrepreneurial journey and how you got to that point.
Sure. So today I'm the Managing Director of Refined, which is a HR technology company. It's a business that we started about 2 years ago, and we listed it on the Australian Stock Exchange on the 9th of July last year. It was the number one IPO in Australia in 2015, and so we've had a lot of success as a small cap stock on the market, and we've sort of focused on really growing that business really quickly.
And I think the first question people would want to know is, how did you list the company so quickly? Many people would list a company after 5 or maybe 10 years, but you were to do it in just over 12 months. So that's pretty fast to get to a listing.
It is, and I think the traditional route for most technology startups is to look at venture capital. We raised some money prior to listing, about $2 million, but we sort of had a look at the private equity or the VC market and found that look at a lot of the terms and conditions in that market are quite onerous, and you don't have that sort of independence that a public company has. If you look at a really high-profile company like Xero, it also listed very, very early in its life, and so we felt that the timing was right and the market conditions were good for a small cap technology company in Australia, and so we made the decision to list.
All right, now is this your first rodeo, or have you built a few businesses before?
I've built 1 or 8 or so. I probably spent about 20 years in the corporate world in various capacities, and then worked out that I was unemployable and after I got fired from my 7th job, I think. But I've had a number of very large technology roles, working for people like Cisco, Salesforce.com. I spent a lot of time in the US and in Europe working for pretty large brand name tech companies. I founded one of my first businesses in 2009, and I sold that to private equity out of New York in 2012. And as a result of that, we set up our own technology incubator and venture fund.
All right, now, so let's talk about your story. When did you first were you an entrepreneurial kid at school, or did the idea of becoming an entrepreneur only dawn on you sort of later in life? Yeah,
look, I was a musician at school, which is pretty unusual. I was probably a bit more of a nerd. Look, I had definitely wanted to be an entrepreneur from an early age. I think I had a couple of businesses around the place, washed cars and others. I've always had my own business in some capacity, even while I was working for large companies. And so I think you can have an entrepreneurial approach inside business, but there's nothing like taking a risk and backing yourself. And so, I think that, I can sort of smell another entrepreneur a mile away. I think they've got some pretty interesting and unique characteristics, but I've always had that sort of entrepreneurial drive.
So you're into music at school, and then what did you study when you left school? Did you study business? Or
no,
not?
I studied physics. So my undergrad,
it's getting more and more interesting.
Yeah, I've got a very different background. So I did a Bachelor of Applied Science, Applied Physics at UTS, and then rapidly worked out that a job at the CSIRO for life probably wasn't where I was headed. And so out of uni, I started as a computer repair guy. So a man in a van fixing motherboards, driving around town, replacing hardware on computers. And
so
I really
were you
started
quite
at the
technical?
bottom. Yeah, I was. I mean, I think that helps me actually even today, being technical. But yeah, started out as a hardware repair technician.
So did you ever study programming at all?
Look, a little bit at uni, Fortran 77, and a little bit of C.
So it's not very helpful today?
No, I would say it's zero help today, let's be honest. But yeah, I did code, but I wasn't a developer necessarily. But started in hardware and then moved into networking and did a lot of large networking infrastructure for the Department of Defence and for other large organisations in Australia.
Now, you had some time in the corporate world. What advice would you give to other young entrepreneurs? Because a lot of the younger ones just want to go straight into their own business and kind of to hell with the corporate world. Do you think that's a good place to kind of start building your career? Do you see it as being something that was really valuable, or do you think it was a bit of a waste of time?
I think it's hugely valuable. I think the biggest thing I think I see entrepreneurs do is sort of say it's all or nothing. And I love their passion, and I love our passion, but sometimes you can use other people's money to buffer and de-risk your entrepreneurial endeavours. And so, a lot of people who are in the corporate world approach me with business ideas, and our venture fund saw about 110 businesses last year seeking funding and advice. And a lot of them I say, look, you don't have to make the leap immediately. You can incubate a business while you're working for somebody else. You can learn new skills actually in the corporate world. I mean, I've learned a lot about what not to do actually working in the corporate world. But
explain this idea of incubating a business. What is that all about?
Well, I mean, ultimately, you can spend a lot of your time when you're working for somebody else building another business, right? I mean,
don't tell anybody.
Well, I mean, look, there's not just 9 to 5. I mean, ultimately, you still have to pay your bills, and you don't necessarily have to put yourself on the breadline as an entrepreneur and sort of take that sort of typical kind of cliched live on your mum's lounge and eat ramen noodles kind of approach. Well, that does work for some people, but I see a lot of people in corporate jobs that are paying them well and they've got plenty of spare time on their hands. They're not really intellectually challenged, and they can use that spare time to experiment and try some new ideas out. Speaking to other entrepreneurs, you don't always get it right first time, and so having that kind of little bit of a financial buffer where you can do something while you're still working full time sort of gives you that sort of freedom to experiment with your business idea in a less stressful environment rather than having to sort of put all your chips in and sort of take a big bet.
So at what age did you decide, okay, I'm done with corporate life, time for me to move onto my own business?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is I decided that 3 jobs before I actually took the leap, right? So,
right, okay.
So look, there came a point in time where I was just having this, sort of soul-destroying conversation with a manager in one of my jobs, and I said, you know what, I'm never going to work in the corporate world again. Now, it took me 3 jobs later till I finally made the leap.
But what was holding you back, do you think?
Look, I mean, I've got 3 kids, and at that point I had mortgages and all those sort of responsibilities as a grown-up tends to have, and I really wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I hadn't actually found my passion yet, and I think that's one of the keys to really being an entrepreneur is that you've got to have an itch that you want to scratch specifically, because it means you can be passionate about it and do it every day. And I hadn't really found the sweet spot for myself in terms of what I wanted to do, and I also wanted to sort of do it in a way that sort of minimised the risk more than anything else.
Let's talk about both of those two things. So what was it that ultimately kind of grabbed your attention and said, okay, this deserves more of me, time for me to go for it?
Yeah, so the thing that really grabbed me was a result of one of the worst mistakes I've ever made. So myself and my current business partner, probably about 3 years ago, made an investment into a technology startup. And a sort of a group of us put about $1.5 million into a company for 27%. So what we'd call a $4 million pre-money valuation, and it was a disaster. So everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. The founders were challenging to deal with. We had a minority position. The board was dysfunctional. The product hadn't had uptake. We gave them all the money all at once. They spent it all really quickly. And as a result of that, me and Ben sat down. Ben's my business partner, and we sort of said, you know what, there's got to be a better way to do startups in Australia. Up until that point in time, a lot of people in Australia, and still to this day, emulate the US model for incubating and growing startups, which is very much a venture capital driven model. And we felt there was a better way to do it. And that was the thing that really drove my passion. I'd already started and sold a technology startup at that point in time. So I was sort of semi-retired, sort of did a bit of skiing, and my wife said, you've got to do something to get out of the house. And so me and Ben started Digital Forge, which is our funding and incubation company, with a view to sort of saying, you know what, we're going to do startups in a way that really focuses on decoupling, the people, the idea and the money, and getting the best of all 3 of those elements.
All right, great. And now the other thing that I'd like to talk about is mentors. Who were some of your mentors that you had along the way?
Surprisingly, I haven't had a lot of mentors. I have worked for a lot of people who I thought were pretty crap.
Yeah.
And I sort of learnt through negative experience, which is really strange. So, I've had some good bosses, but most of the time I've worked with people who I thought were sort of, Peter Principle, had risen to the top and hadn't really done a good job. So I'm pretty much self-contained, so I've spent a lot of time sort of.
To continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.